History is not a simple line of events. It is a vast, intricate tapestry woven with the threads of human lives, ambitions, and follies. And some threads are so vibrant, so dominant, they change the pattern of the entire cloth. One such thread belongs to a man whose name has become a synonym for genius, tyranny, love, and war: Napoleon Bonaparte. But beyond the grand battles, the sweeping reforms, and the imperial crown, there lies a labyrinth of stories, a collection of moments that reveal the man behind the myth. A man who, in the quiet of his study, was haunted by strange premonitions and a deep-seated fear of cats. A man who could order the deaths of thousands, yet weep at the sight of a wounded dog. A man who cheated at cards with the same intensity he planned his campaigns. Tonight, we journey into the shadows of history to uncover the secret anecdotes of Napoleon Bonaparte. We will not walk the well-trodden path of his victories and defeats. Instead, we will seek the whispers in the corridors of power, the scribbled notes in the margins of his letters, the forgotten memories of those who knew him not as an emperor, but as a brother, a lover, a friend, and an enemy. This is the story of Napoleon as you have never heard it before, a mosaic of contradictions, a portrait of a man who was, in the end, as profoundly human as he was historically monumental. The story begins not on a battlefield, but on the rugged, wild island of Corsica, a place of fierce loyalties and ancient vendettas. Here, in the small town of Ajaccio, a young Napoleon, or Nabulio as his family called him, was a solitary and brooding child. He was fiercely proud of his Corsican heritage, and initially, he harbored a deep resentment for the French who had conquered his homeland. This early conflict would shape his entire life, a constant battle between his identity as an outsider and his ambition to conquer the very world that had subjugated him. He was a difficult child, prone to fits of temper, yet also possessing an intense curiosity and a prodigious memory. His mother, Laetitia, a woman of iron will and stern discipline, was perhaps the only person he truly feared. She would often remind him, even at the height of his power, that he was, first and foremost, her son. One of the most telling anecdotes from his childhood involves a simple pair of stockings. Laetitia had knitted him a new pair, but Napoleon, in a fit of pique, threw them into the fire. Without a word, Laetitia grabbed him and held his bare shins to the flames, teaching him a lesson about waste and gratitude that he would never forget. It was a harsh lesson, but it was a lesson in the reality of a world that gives and takes away, a world that he would one day seek to master. This formative experience, brutal as it was, instilled in him a deep-seated understanding of consequence, a lesson that would serve him well on the battlefields of Europe. He learned that every action has a reaction, every choice a price, and he learned that fire, both literal and metaphorical, was a tool to be respected, a force to be wielded with caution and precision. His military genius was apparent from a young age. At the military academy of Brienne-le-Château, he was an outsider, a scholarship student with a thick Corsican accent, often mocked by his aristocratic French classmates. He found solace in books, devouring works on history, mathematics, and military strategy. He was a voracious reader, and his ability to absorb and retain information was legendary. He would often retreat to the library, his own personal fortress, where he could wage battles on paper and dream of future glories. It was here that he organized his fellow students in an epic snowball fight, a seemingly childish game that he directed with the seriousness of a real battle, complete with trenches, fortifications, and a clear chain of command. It was a glimpse of the man to come, a man who saw the world as a grand chessboard and himself as the master player. He was not just playing, he was rehearsing. Every snowball thrown was a cannonball in his mind, every captured position a fortress taken. This was not the play of a boy, but the simulation of a general in waiting. His teachers noted his extraordinary aptitude for mathematics, a skill that would later allow him to calculate artillery trajectories with astonishing speed and accuracy. He was not a popular student, but he was a respected one. His intensity, his focus, and his sheer intellectual horsepower were impossible to ignore. He was a lone wolf, a young eagle dreaming of soaring above the petty squabbles of his peers. He was a man who was already at war, not with a foreign enemy, but with the limitations of his own circumstances. But it was not just his intellect that set him apart. It was his ambition, a fire that burned so brightly it consumed everything in its path. He believed in his destiny, in his star, as he called it. This belief was not just a poetic turn of phrase. It was a deep, almost mystical conviction that he was destined for greatness. He was intensely superstitious, a strange contradiction for a man of the Enlightenment. He believed in omens, in lucky charms, and in the power of numbers. He would never begin a major undertaking on a Friday, and he considered the number 13 to be deeply unlucky. He carried a small, worn copy of The Sorrows of Young Werther with him on his campaigns, a testament to the romantic, emotional side that he so often concealed beneath a veneer of cold, calculating logic. He was a man of reason who believed in fate, a general who consulted astrologers, a ruler who was, in many ways, a prisoner of his own superstitions. This duality is key to understanding him. He was a man who could meticulously plan a battle down to the last detail, yet also believed that the outcome was ultimately in the hands of fate. He was a man who could rationally analyze a political situation, yet also be swayed by a dream or a premonition. This blend of logic and mysticism, of calculation and intuition, was both a source of his strength and a seed of his downfall. It allowed him to take audacious risks, to gamble on the seemingly impossible, but it also led him to misjudge his enemies, to underestimate the power of chance, to believe that his star would never fade. His rise to power was meteoric, a whirlwind of political intrigue and military triumphs. But even as he climbed the ladder of success, he never forgot his roots. He was fiercely loyal to his family, a sprawling, ambitious clan that he would eventually place on the thrones of Europe. His relationship with his siblings was a complex mix of affection, frustration, and political calculation. He was the patriarch, the provider, the one who had lifted them from obscurity to unimaginable heights of power and wealth. But they were also a constant source of trouble, their petty jealousies and insatiable ambitions often causing him more headaches than his enemies. He once famously remarked, "I have made marshals of France, but I could not make them gentlemen." The same could be said of his own family. He showered them with titles and riches, but he could not give them the one thing he possessed in abundance: genius. His brother Lucien, who had been instrumental in the coup of 18 Brumaire that brought Napoleon to power, was a constant source of irritation. His sister Caroline, married to Marshal Murat, was a woman of boundless ambition and questionable morals. And his brother, Jérôme, the youngest, was a spendthrift and a womanizer who Napoleon once described as a scoundrel. Yet, he loved them. In his own way, he was the head of the clan, and he took his responsibilities seriously. He was their son, and they were the planets that revolved around him, sometimes in harmony, often in chaotic, unpredictable orbits. He was a man who understood the power of family, of blood, of loyalty, but he was also a man who was constantly disappointed by the very people he had raised so high. Of all his relationships, none was more complex, more passionate, or more tragic than his love for Joséphine de Beauharnais. She was a beautiful, charming, and extravagant Creole from Martinique, a widow with 2 children and a string of lovers. He was a young, awkward, and intensely ambitious general. He fell for her completely, his letters to her a torrent of passionate, almost desperate declarations of love. "I awake full of you," he wrote. "Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses." But their love was a stormy one, marked by his long absences on campaign, her infidelities, and his own consuming ambition. He was a man who demanded absolute loyalty, yet he had fallen for a woman who could not give it to him. The irony was not lost on him. He would eventually divorce her, a painful but, in his mind, necessary act to secure an heir and a legitimate dynasty. But he never stopped loving her. On his deathbed, his last words were a whisper: France, the army, the head of the army, Joséphine. The story of their divorce is a heartbreaking one. He loved her, but he loved his dynasty more. He needed an heir, and she could not give him one. The scene of their final dinner together is a study in controlled emotion. He was cold, distant, his mind already on the future. She was devastated, her world crumbling around her. After the divorce, he continued to provide for her, to write to her, to inquire after her health. He had moved on, but he had not forgotten. She was the love of his youth, the woman who had shared his rise to power, the one who had, in her own way, helped to create the legend of Napoleon. She was his lucky star, his talisman, his beautiful, flawed, and unforgettable Joséphine. His second wife, Marie Louise of Austria, was a different matter altogether. She was a young, innocent, and politically expedient choice, the daughter of his old enemy, the Austrian emperor. Their marriage was a cold, calculated affair, a union of two empires rather than two hearts. Yet Napoleon, in his own way, tried to be a good husband. He was surprisingly gentle and considerate with her, a far cry from the ruthless conqueror the world knew. He showered her with gifts, wrote her affectionate letters, and was overjoyed at the birth of their son, the King of Rome. But there was always a distance between them, a chasm that could not be bridged by duty or affection. She was a Habsburg princess, he was a Corsican upstart. They were from two different worlds, and in the end, their worlds would collide. When he was exiled to Elba, she abandoned him, returning to the safety of her father's court. He was hurt, but not surprised. He had never truly trusted her, had never truly believed that she could love him for himself. She was a symbol of his legitimacy, a means to an end. And when the end came, she was gone. The contrast between his two wives could not be more stark. Joséphine was a woman of passion, of fire, of life. Marie Louise was a woman of duty, of protocol, of ice. He loved one and he used the other, and in the end, he lost them both. Napoleon's habits were as unique as his personality. He was a man of immense energy, often working for 18 to 20 hours a day. He could fall asleep at will, even on the eve of a major battle, and would often wake up in the middle of the night to dictate letters and orders. He had a phenomenal memory for detail, and could recall the exact location of a particular regiment, the name of a minor official, or the precise wording of a legal code. He was a micromanager, a man who wanted to control every aspect of his empire, from the grand strategy of his armies to the price of bread in Paris. He was also a man of simple tastes. He ate quickly, often finishing his meals in under 10 minutes. He drank little wine and preferred simple, unadorned food. He had a particular fondness for roast chicken and potatoes. He was also a man who was surprisingly vain. He was intensely conscious of his height, or lack thereof, and would often wear heeled boots to appear taller. He was also obsessed with his public image, carefully curating the paintings, sculptures, and bulletins that would shape his legend for posterity. He was a master of propaganda, a man who understood the power of image, of story, of myth. He was not just a general. He was a showman, a performer, an artist who used the world as his canvas. He was a man who was always on stage, always aware of his audience, always playing a role. The role of the hero, the role of the savior, the role of the emperor. It was a role that he played to perfection, a role that would ultimately consume him. His interactions with his soldiers were legendary. He knew how to inspire them, how to speak to them in a language they understood. He would often walk among them on the eve of a battle, sharing their jokes, tasting their soup, and calling them by name. He had an uncanny ability to remember the faces and service records of individual soldiers, a small gesture that meant the world to the men who were about to die for him. He called them his grognards, his grumblers, a term of endearment for the grizzled veterans who had followed him across Europe. They, in turn, called him Le Petit Caporal, the little corporal, a nickname that spoke of their affection and their respect. He was their leader, their father, their god of war, and they would follow him to the ends of the earth. There is a story of a young sentry who fell asleep at his post, a crime punishable by death. Napoleon, on his nightly rounds, found the sleeping soldier. Instead of waking him and having him arrested, he took the soldier's musket and that stood guard in his place. When the soldier awoke, he was horrified to see his emperor performing his duty. Napoleon simply handed him back his weapon and said, "After a long march, a good soldier deserves a good sleep." The story, whether true or not, perfectly captures the bond between Napoleon and his men. A bond forged in the crucible of war, a bond that was the foundation of his power. It was a bond that was built on a foundation of mutual respect, of shared hardship, of a common destiny. He was their emperor, but he was also one of them. He was a soldier, just like them, and they loved him for it. But there was also a darker side to Napoleon, a ruthless, calculating, and often cruel streak. He was a man who believed that the ends justified the means, and he was not afraid to spill blood to achieve his goals. The execution of the Duc d'Enghien, a young Bourbon prince, was a cold, calculated act of political terror, a warning to his enemies that he would stop at nothing to protect his throne. The invasion of Russia, a disastrous campaign that cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of his soldiers, was a testament to his hubris, his refusal to accept defeat. He was a man who could be both incredibly generous and incredibly vindictive. He would reward loyalty with lavish gifts and titles, but he would punish betrayal with a cold, unforgiving fury. He was a man of contradictions, a man who could be both a liberator and a tyrant, a hero and a villain. The massacre at Jaffa during his Egyptian campaign is a chilling example of his ruthlessness. After the city surrendered, Napoleon ordered the execution of over 2,000 prisoners of war. His reasoning was cold and pragmatic. He did not have the food to feed them or the men to guard them. It was a brutal, but in his mind, necessary act of war. It was a decision that would haunt him, a stain on his legacy that could never be washed away. It was a reminder that even the greatest of men are capable of the greatest of evils. One of the most bizarre and revealing anecdotes from his life took place in Egypt during his campaign to conquer the East. After the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon, ever the student of history, decided to spend a night alone inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. He was a man who was fascinated by the ancient world, and he wanted to connect with the spirits of the pharaohs, to feel the weight of history on his shoulders. He entered the king's chamber and ordered his men to leave him. He emerged the next morning, pale and shaken. He would never speak of what he experienced inside the pyramid, but it was clear that something profound had happened to him. When a trusted aide asked him what had occurred, Napoleon simply replied, "You would not believe me if I told you." The incident remains a mystery, a tantalizing glimpse into the spiritual, mystical side of a man who was, in so many ways, a product of the rational, secular age of the Enlightenment. What did he see in that dark, silent chamber? A vision of his future glory? A premonition of his ultimate downfall? We will never know. But the story adds another layer to the enigma of Napoleon, a man who was as much a mystic as he was a soldier, as much a dreamer as he was a pragmatist. It is a reminder that there are some things that cannot be explained by logic, by reason, by science. Some things that can only be felt, that can only be experienced, that can only be believed. Another strange and telling story comes from his time in exile on the island of Elba. After his first abdication, Napoleon was sent to this small, sun-drenched island in the Mediterranean. He was given sovereignty over the island, a tiny kingdom for a man who had once ruled an empire. He threw himself into the task of governing his new domain with the same energy and attention to detail that he had once devoted to the affairs of Europe. He designed a new flag, built new roads, and reformed the island's legal system. He was, in a sense, playing at being an emperor, a king in a miniature kingdom. But the game could not last. His ambition was too great, his spirit too restless. He escaped from Elba and returned to France for the 100 Days, a final, desperate gamble to reclaim his lost glory. The story of his escape is a testament to his audacity, his charisma, and his enduring hold on the imagination of the French people. He landed in France with a small band of followers and began to march towards Paris. The royalist troops sent to intercept him were under the command of Marshal Ney, one of his former generals. As the two armies faced each other, Napoleon, in a moment of pure, unadulterated theater, walked forward alone, opened his coat, exposing his chest. "Soldiers of the Fifth," he cried, "if there is one among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." The soldiers, to a man, broke into cheers of "Vive l'Empereur" and joined his cause. It was a moment of pure, unscripted drama, a testament to the power of a single man to change the course of history. It was a moment that perfectly encapsulated the Napoleonic legend, a legend that was built on a foundation of courage, charisma, and a deep, almost primal connection with the French people. It was a moment that showed that even in defeat, even in exile, Napoleon was still a force to be reckoned with. The end, when it came, was a slow, agonizing decline. After his final defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon was exiled to the remote, windswept island of St. Helena, a tiny speck of land in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Here, under the watchful eye of his British jailers, he would spend the last 6 years of his life a prisoner on a rock. He spent his days dictating his memoirs, a final, desperate attempt to shape his own legend, to have the last word in the great debate of his life. He argued with his captors, played with the children of his companions, and tended to his garden. He was a man who had once held the fate of Europe in his hands, now reduced to the petty squabbles and mundane routines of a political prisoner. He died in 1821 at the age of 51. The official cause of death was stomach cancer, but there have always been rumors of arsenic poisoning, a final, secret act of betrayal. His death, like his life, was shrouded in mystery and controversy. His last words, a faint whisper, were a testament to the three great loves of his life: France, the army, the head of the army, Joséphine. It was a fitting end for a man who had lived and breathed for these three things, a man who had given everything for his country, for his soldiers, and for the woman he had never stopped loving. What, then, are we to make of this man, this bundle of contradictions, this force of nature that swept across Europe like a hurricane? Was he a hero or a villain, a liberator or a tyrant, a genius or a madman? The truth, as always, is more complex. He was all of these things and none of them. He was a product of his time, a man of the Enlightenment who believed in reason, in progress, in the power of the human will to shape its own destiny. But he was also a man of the past, a man who was drawn to the glory of ancient Rome, to the power of the Caesars, to the idea of a universal empire. He was a man who could be both incredibly modern and incredibly archaic, a man who was, in many ways, a bridge between two worlds. The anecdotes of his life, the small, forgotten stories, reveal a man who was not a god, but a human being, with all the flaws, the passions, and the contradictions that make us human. A man who loved, who hated, who feared, who dreamed. A man who, in the end, was as much a prisoner of his own legend as he was its creator. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte is not just the story of a great man. It is the story of the human condition, of the eternal struggle between our highest aspirations and our darkest impulses. It is a story that continues to fascinate us, to inspire us, and to haunt us. A story that is, in the end, the story of ourselves. His legacy is a complex and contested one. He was a man who brought both order and chaos, liberty and tyranny, progress and destruction. He was a man who redrew the map of Europe, who rewrote the laws of France, who changed the very way we think about war, politics, and power. He was a man who, for a brief, brilliant moment, held the world in the palm of his hand. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The story of Napoleon is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the greatest of men are, in the end, mortal. It is a story that teaches us about the intoxicating allure of power, the corrupting influence of ambition, and the ultimate futility of trying to conquer the world. But it is also a story that inspires us, a story that reminds us of the incredible things that a single human being can achieve, of the power of the human will to overcome adversity, to defy expectations, to change the world. Napoleon Bonaparte was a man of his time, but he was also a man for all time. And his story, the story of the little corporal from Corsica who became the master of Europe, will continue to be told as long as there are people who dare to dream, to fight, and to reach for the stars. His life was a testament to the power of the human will, a symphony of ambition, a tragedy of hubris. And it is a story that will echo through the ages, a story that will never be forgotten. We will now delve even deeper into the lesser-known facets of his life, exploring the strange and wonderful, the dark and disturbing, the moments that have been lost to history, but that are essential to understanding the true nature of this extraordinary man. We will examine his relationship with his mother, a woman who was as ambitious as he was and who never let him forget where he came from. We will explore his fascination with the occult, his belief in ghosts and spirits, and his strange, almost childlike fear of the dark. We will uncover the story of his secret police, a vast network of spies and informants that he used to control his enemies and to keep a watchful eye on his own people. We will learn about his love of music, his passion for opera, and his surprisingly good singing voice. We will discover the man who was a patron of the arts and sciences, a man who established the Legion of Honor, a man who reformed the French legal system with the Napoleonic Code, a body of law that is still in use today. We will also confront the man who was a ruthless dictator, a man who censored the press, who imprisoned his political opponents, who was responsible for the deaths of millions. This is the full story of Napoleon Bonaparte, a story of light and shadow, of good and evil, of a man who was both a monster and a messiah, a man who was, in the end, a reflection of our own complex and contradictory nature. His fear of cats, for instance, was not a mere quirk. It was a genuine phobia, a deep-seated aversion that would cause him to break out in a cold sweat at the mere sight of a feline. This ailurophobia, as it is known, is a strange and revealing detail, a chink in the armor of the man who seemed to fear nothing. It is a reminder that even the most powerful of men have their vulnerabilities, their irrational fears, their hidden demons. His love of hot baths was another peculiar habit. He would spend hours soaking in a steaming tub, often dictating letters and orders to his secretaries from the comfort of his bath. It was a place of relaxation, of contemplation, of inspiration. It was a place where he could escape the pressures of his office, the weight of his empire, the burden of his own ambition. It was a place where he could be, for a brief moment, just a man in a tub of hot water. His cheating at cards was another telling detail. He was a man who was used to winning, a man who could not stand to lose, even in a friendly game of cards. He would often sneak a look at his opponent's hands or secretly add a few extra cards to his own. It was a small, almost childish act of deception, but it spoke volumes about his competitive nature, his insatiable desire to be the best, to be the winner in all things, great and small. These small, seemingly insignificant details are the building blocks of a more complete, more human, more fascinating portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte. They are the pieces of the puzzle that, when put together, reveal the true nature of the man behind the legend. A man who was, in the end, a magnificent and a tragic work in his own way human being. And there are more stories, more secrets, more whispers from the past that paint an even richer picture. Consider the time he was attacked by a horde of rabbits. During a hunt organized in his honor, the captured rabbits, instead of fleeing, swarmed him, climbing up his legs, their intentions seemingly more aggressive than fearful. A bizarre, almost comical scene, yet one that speaks to the unpredictable nature of life, a lesson that even an emperor cannot control everything. Or the story of his brief and disastrous attempts to learn to drive a carriage, which ended with him crashing and injuring himself. A reminder that even a man who could command armies could be humbled by a simple, everyday task. These are the moments that bring the marble statue to life, that give it flesh and blood, that make it human. These are the stories that we will continue to explore as we journey deeper into the heart of the Napoleonic enigma. His work ethic was legendary, but it was fueled by a constant, nervous energy. He was a man who could not be still, a man who was always in motion, always thinking, always planning. He would pace back and forth in his study for hours, dictating to a team of secretaries who worked in shifts to keep up with his torrent of ideas. He was a man who was at war, not just with his enemies, but with time itself. He was a man who was always racing against the clock, always trying to do more, to achieve more, to be more. This relentless drive was the source of his greatest triumphs, but it was also the source of his greatest failures. It was what led him to conquer Europe, but it was also what led him to invade Russia, a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. He was a man who did not know when to stop, a man who was a prisoner of his own relentless, all-consuming ambition. And in the end, it was this ambition that would destroy him.